The dining room was thick with tension as my family gathered around the Thanksgiving table. I forced a smile, trying to maintain an air of normalcy despite the undercurrent of hostility that had become all too familiar. "Maureen, dear, the turkey is a bit dry this year," Evelyn remarked with a saccharine smile, her eyes glinting with malice. I tightened my grip on the carving knife, searching for support from Richard, but he merely muttered, "Mother, please." Evelyn's barbs were like needles, each one piercing deeper into the fragile fabric of our family. I caught Emily's eye, her expression a mixture of sadness and resignation. My heart ached for her, caught in the crossfire of Evelyn's relentless campaign against me. "I'm sure it's delicious, Evelyn," I said, my voice strained. "Richard, would you like to carve?" He shrugged, passing the knife to me without a word. The weight of his indifference was suffocating, a constant reminder of how far our once-loving marriage had deteriorated. As I carved into the turkey, the tension in the room was palpable. Evelyn's snide remarks continued, each one a calculated strike against my self-worth. I longed for Richard to defend me, to stand by my side as he once had, but his silence was deafening. Emily picked at her food, her appetite clearly diminished by the toxic atmosphere. I wanted nothing more than to shield her from this turmoil, but Evelyn's claws were deeply embedded in our family dynamic. "Maureen, have you spoken to Emily about her future plans?" Evelyn asked, her voice dripping with false concern. A young woman her age should be thinking about settling down, starting a family of her own. I bristled at the implication, but before I could respond, Evelyn continued, "Of course, with her situation, it might be difficult to find a suitable partner." The veiled insult hung in the air, and I felt Emily tense beside me. Anger coursed through my veins, but I swallowed it down, determined not to give Evelyn the satisfaction of a reaction. "Emily is doing just fine, Evelyn," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. "She's focused on her career, and that's what's important right now." Evelyn's lips curled into a smug smile, and I knew this battle was far from over. As the meal dragged on, the tension only grew, each barbed comment and loaded silence driving the wedge deeper between us. When the last plate was cleared, I excused myself, retreating to the kitchen under the guise of cleaning up. In truth, I needed a moment to catch my breath, to steady myself against the onslaught of Evelyn's cruelty. As I stood at the sink, the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm me. But then I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder, and I turned to find Emily beside me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I pulled her into a fierce embrace, my resolve hardening. No matter what Evelyn threw at us, I would never let her tear our family apart. This was a battle I intended to win, no matter the cost. After that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner, I found myself reflecting on how my once idyllic marriage had devolved into a battleground, with Evelyn's constant meddling driving a wedge between Richard and me. It hadn't always been this way. When we first met, Richard was charming and attentive, and I thought I'd finally found the partner I deserved after my previous marriage ended. We bonded over our shared experiences as single parents, and he embraced Emily as his own. But as the years passed, Evelyn's influence grew more insidious. Her snide comments and backhanded compliments slowly chipped away at my self-confidence, and Richard's indifference only fueled her cruelty. "Are you certain Emily's really yours, Richard?" Evelyn had asked during that fateful dinner, her words dripping with venom. I saw the flicker of doubt cross Richard's face, and my heart sank. How could he entertain such a notion after all these years of treating Emily as his own? But that was Evelyn's way, sowing seeds of mistrust and discord wherever she went. In the days that followed, the tension in our home was palpable. Richard grew increasingly distant, retreating into his work and leaving me to navigate the minefield of Evelyn's manipulation alone. It was Susan, my dear friend, who suggested the family trip to Lake Tahoe. "A change of scenery might do you all some good," she said, her eyes filled with concern. "It could be a chance to reconnect away from the daily grind." I clung to that hope, convincing myself that a few days in the great outdoors would be the balm our fractured family needed. But when I broached the idea with Richard, his reaction surprised me. "That's a wonderful idea," he said, his eyes alight with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. "We could make it a real family affair, Invite Emily, too. I should have been overjoyed, but something about his sudden eagerness felt off. Still, I pushed my doubts aside, desperate for any opportunity to mend the rifts that had formed. Emily, however, was less than thrilled. "Do I have to go?" she asked, her voice laced with trepidation. "You know how Grandma Evelyn is." My heart ached for her, subjected to Evelyn's cruelty time and again. "It'll be different this time," I assured her, though my own conviction wavered. "We'll be away from all that, just us as a family." As we packed our bags, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was about more than just family bonding. Richard's sudden interest, coupled with Evelyn's veiled comments, set my nerves on edge. But I pushed those thoughts aside, determined to make the most of this chance to heal the wounds that had festered for far too long. Little did I know the storm brewing on the horizon would tear our family apart in ways I never could have imagined. The drive to Lake Tahoe was tense, with Emily sulking in the back seat and Richard's forced cheerfulness grating on my nerves. Evelyn, of course, was her usual self, making snide comments about the accommodations and the route we'd chosen. "Honestly, Richard, couldn't we have splurged on something a bit nicer?" she tutted, eyeing the modest cabin we'd rented with disdain. Richard shot me an apologetic glance, but I could see the flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "It's just for a few days, Mother. We wanted something cozy, away from the hustle and bustle." Evelyn sniffed, clearly unconvinced, but mercifully fell silent as we unpacked our bags. Emily retreated to her room almost immediately, her discomfort palpable. As evening fell, Richard suggested a walk along the lake's edge. "Some fresh air might do us all some good," he said, his tone almost pleading. Reluctantly, I agreed, and we set off in an awkward silence, the tension thick between us. It was Richard who finally broke the ice. "Maureen, I know things have been strained lately," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "But I want you to know that I'm committed to making this work, to being the family we once were." I studied his face, searching for any hint of deception, but his expression seemed earnest. Still, Evelyn's words lingered in the back of my mind, sowing seeds of doubt. "I want that too, Richard," I said carefully, "but we can't keep sweeping things under the rug. Your mother's comments, the way she treats Emily, it's tearing us apart." Richard sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. I know, but she's my mother, Maureen. You have to understand how difficult it is for me." I bit back the retort that sprang to my lips, reminding myself that this trip was supposed to be a fresh start. "Let's just focus on us, then," I said, forcing a smile, "on being a family again, the way we used to be." Richard's face brightened, and for a moment I allowed myself to hope that this trip might be the turning point we so desperately needed. That hope was short-lived. The next morning, as we gathered for breakfast, Richard cleared his throat, his expression suddenly grave. "I've been doing some thinking," he began, his gaze sweeping over us, "about the future and what happens if something were to happen to me." Emily tensed beside me, and I felt a knot of dread forming in my stomach. "I've decided to make some changes to my will," Richard continued, oblivious to our discomfort, "just to ensure that everything is taken care of, and that my assets are distributed fairly." Evelyn nodded approvingly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than he was letting on. As the day wore on, Richard's words weighed heavily on my mind. What did he mean by distributed fairly? And why now, after all these years of seeming content with our arrangement? It was later that evening, as I was taking a solitary walk along the lake's edge, that I overheard the conversation that would shatter my world. "Can't let that little brat inherit a single cent," Evelyn was hissing, her voice laced with venom. "She's not even your blood, Richard." My heart stopped as I realized they were talking about Emily. "Don't worry, Mother," Richard replied, his tone chillingly calm. "I'm taking care of it. Maureen won't be a problem for much longer." Their words washed over me like a tidal wave, and I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling. How could Richard, the man I'd once loved, be so callous, so cruel? In that moment, I knew that our family was fractured beyond repair, and that I would do whatever it took to protect Emily, no matter the cost. In the days following my chilling discovery, Richard's behavior took on a disturbing new dimension. Gone was the strained indifference that had plagued our marriage for years. In its place was a sickening facade of warmth and affection. directed primarily at Emily. "Sweetheart, why don't we go for a hike today?" he'd suggest, his voice dripping with false cheer. "Just the two of us, some quality father-daughter time." Emily would shoot me a wary glance, but Richard's insistence was relentless. Reluctantly, she would agree, and they'd set off together, leaving me to stew in a potent brew of anxiety and suspicion. During those long hours, my mind would race, conjuring up increasingly sinister scenarios. Was Richard trying to drive a wedge between Emily and me? Was he plotting something more sinister, something that would justify his callous disregard for her well-being? When they returned, flushed from the mountain air, Richard would beam at me, his eyes alight with a twisted sense of triumph. "We had such a wonderful time, didn't we, Emily?" he'd gush, pulling her into an embrace that made my skin crawl. Emily, for her part, would remain tight-lipped, her expression guarded. But I could see the confusion and hurt in her eyes, and it broke my heart. One evening, as we sat around the crackling fire, Richard turned to Emily, his expression suddenly grave. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about what happens if something happens to me." The words hung in the air like a lead weight, and I felt my heart plummet. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading, the moment when Richard's true intentions would be laid bare. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean, Dad?" Richard sighed, his tone one of practiced solemnity. "Well, you know I've been updating my will lately, making sure everything is in order, just in case." My hands clenched into fists, anger and fear coursing through my veins. How dare he use this trip, this supposed opportunity for healing, to further his twisted agenda? "Emily, my dear," Evelyn chimed in, her voice sickly sweet. "Your father and I have been discussing this at length, and we want to make sure you're taken care of, no matter what." I could see the confusion on Emily's face, the way her eyes darted between Richard and Evelyn, searching for answers. "What your grandmother is trying to say," Richard continued, "is that we've decided to make some changes to the will, to ensure that our assets are distributed fairly and that you're provided for." The implication was clear. They intended to cut Emily out, to leave her with nothing while they lavished their fortune on themselves and their precious bloodline. I opened my mouth to protest, but Richard held up a hand, silencing me. Now, Maureen, let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is a delicate matter, and we need to handle it with care." His words were like a slap in the face, and I felt the rage building within me, a white-hot fury that threatened to consume me. How dare he treat Emily like a mere afterthought, a loose end to be tied up and discarded? In that moment, I knew that the battle lines had been drawn. Richard and Evelyn had made their intentions clear, and I would stop at nothing to protect my daughter from their callous machinations. The war had begun, and I would emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The next morning, I cornered Richard as he was sipping his coffee on the cabin's porch. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. He looked up, his expression one of feigned innocence. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation. "I overheard you and your mother talking the other night about cutting Emily out of your will." Richard's face hardened, and he set his mug down with a sharp clink. "Maureen, you're overreacting. We were just discussing our options, that's all." "Options?" I sputtered. "You were plotting to leave our daughter destitute, and you have the audacity to call it options?" He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Emily isn't my blood, Maureen. You know how important legacy is to my family." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I recoiled as if he'd struck me. "She's been your daughter for nearly 2 decades, Richard. How can you say that?" His expression hardened, and I saw a glimpse of the callous man he'd become. "I'm just being practical, Maureen. You'd do well to remember where your loyalties lie." With that, he brushed past me, leaving me seething in his wake. How could I have been so blind, so naive? The man I'd once loved was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating stranger. Later that day, we decided to go for a family hike, ostensibly to clear the air and enjoy the stunning mountain scenery. But the tension was palpable, each of us lost in our own swirling thoughts. Emily lagged behind, her face etched with worry. I slowed my pace to match hers, desperate for a moment of connection. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" I murmured, my voice low. She shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Mom, what's going on? Dad and Grandma have been acting so strange. I hesitated, torn between the desire to protect her and the need for honesty. But one look into her eyes, and I knew I couldn't lie to her. They're planning something, Emily, I said, my voice trembling. Something that could hurt you, hurt us both. Her brow furrowed, and she opened her mouth to respond. But before she could, Evelyn's shrill voice cut through the crisp mountain air. Emily, where are you, dear? Come along now, we mustn't dawdle. Emily shot me a panicked look, and then she was gone, disappearing into the dense foliage that lined the trail. Emily, I called, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was no response, only the eerie silence of the forest. Richard and Evelyn caught up to me, their expressions infuriatingly calm. Where's Emily? I demanded, my voice edged with panic. Evelyn waved a dismissive hand. Oh, she's probably just wandered off. You know how young people are, always distracted by their phones and whatnot. I stared at her, aghast. How could she be so blasé about her own granddaughter's safety? We need to find her, I insisted, my voice rising. She could be hurt or lost or... Maureen, calm down. Richard cut me off, his tone patronizing. She's a grown woman, for heaven's sake. She'll turn up eventually. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own husband, the man who was supposed to love and protect our daughter, was treating her disappearance like a mere inconvenience. Fury and fear warred within me, and I knew in that moment that I couldn't rely on them. If I wanted to find Emily, to keep her safe, I would have to do it myself. With a renewed sense of determination, I plunged into the forest, calling her name over and over again. I would not rest until I found her, until I had her safely back in my arms. And then the reckoning would begin. I searched for what felt like hours, my voice growing hoarse from calling Emily's name. The forest seemed to swallow my cries, leaving me adrift in a sea of towering pines and eerie silence. Finally, I heard a faint rustling in the distance, and my heart leapt with hope. Emily? I called out, stumbling in the direction of the sound. There she was, huddled against the base of a massive tree, her face streaked with tears. Relief washed over me, quickly replaced by a burning rage as I took in her disheveled appearance. Emily, thank God, I breathed, pulling her into a fierce embrace. What happened? Are you all right? She clung to me, her body trembling with sobs. I'm so sorry, Mom, she choked out. I didn't mean to wander off, but I heard them talking. My blood ran cold. Talking? About what? Emily took a shuddering breath, her eyes haunted. About getting rid of you. Of us. Grandma said that once Dad changes his will, we'll be out of their lives for good. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt the world tilt on its axis. So my worst fears were true. Richard and Evelyn were conspiring to cut us out, to erase us from their lives as if we'd never existed. A white-hot fury burned within me, fueled by years of resentment and betrayal. How dare they? How dare they treat us like disposable pawns in their twisted game? Mom? Emily's voice broke through my rage-filled haze. What are we going to do? I looked at her, my beautiful, resilient daughter, and knew in that moment that I would do whatever it took to protect her. No matter the cost. We're going to fight back, I said, my voice steady with newfound resolve. We're not going to let them win, Emily. Not this time. Her eyes widened, but she nodded, a glimmer of determination shining through her tears. Together we made our way back to the cabin, our steps fueled by a shared sense of purpose. Richard and Evelyn were waiting for us, their expressions a sickening mix of feigned concern and thinly veiled annoyance. There you are, Evelyn clucked, her tone dripping with condescension. We were starting to worry. I fixed her with a steely glare, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. Save it, Evelyn. We know what you're up to. Richard's brow furrowed, but I could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. Maureen, what are you talking about? Don't play dumb with me, Richard, I spat, my voice trembling with fury. We heard you. We know you're planning to cut us out, to discard us like old furniture. Evelyn's face contorted into a sneer. Don't be so dramatic, Maureen. We're simply making practical decisions for the good of the family. The good of the family? I echoed, my voice rising. Emily is family, Evelyn. Or have you forgotten that in your quest for control? Before either of them could respond, the cabin door flew open and a familiar figure stepped out onto the porch. Mom, what's going on? It was Michael, my son from my first marriage, his expression one of concern and confusion. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a surge of determination. With Michael by my side, I knew I had the strength to face whatever Richard and Evelyn threw at us. "Michael," I said, my voice steady, "I'm so glad you're here. There's something you need to know." And with that, I launched into the sordid tale of Richard and Evelyn's betrayal, laying bare their manipulative schemes and callous disregard for the family they claimed to cherish. As the truth unfolded, I saw the shock and disgust register on Michael's face, his eyes flickering between Richard and Evelyn with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You think you can discard us like old furniture?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fury. "Well, you're wrong. We're not going anywhere, and we're not going to let you tear this family apart." Richard sneered, his mask of civility finally slipping. "You're just paranoid, Maureen. You always have been." But I was done listening to his lies, done cowering in the face of his and Evelyn's cruelty. With Michael at my side and Emily's unwavering support, I felt a newfound sense of strength, a determination to dismantle their toxic hold on our lives once and for all. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was ready for war. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife as Michael, Emily, and I faced off against Richard and Evelyn. The lines had been drawn, and there was no turning back. "Well," I demanded, my voice trembling with barely contained fury, "what do you have to say for yourselves?" Richard opened his mouth, no doubt prepared to spew more lies and excuses, but Michael cut him off. "Save it, Dad," he spat, his eyes blazing with anger. "I can't believe you'd stoop so low, trying to cut Mom and Emily out like that." Evelyn bristled, her face contorting into a sneer. "Watch your tone, young man. This is a family matter, and you'd do well to stay out of it." "He is family," I shot back, my voice rising. "More than you'll ever be, Evelyn." The words hung in the air, a damning indictment of the woman who had spent years sowing discord and mistrust within our ranks. Richard's expression darkened, and I could see the mask of civility slipping away, revealing the cold, calculating man beneath. "Maureen, you're being hysterical," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "This is precisely why we need to make these changes, to protect our assets from your irrational behavior." I recoiled as if he'd struck me, the sting of his words cutting deep. How dare he? How dare he dismiss me so callously after everything we'd been through? "Irrational?" I echoed, my voice trembling with fury. "You're the ones plotting behind our backs, scheming to cut your own family out of your lives." Emily stepped forward, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Dad, how could you do this to us, after everything?" Richard's gaze flickered towards her, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something akin to regret, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. "Emily, sweetheart, you have to understand," he began, his voice sickly sweet. "This is about protecting our legacy, our family name. You're not. Don't you dare," I snarled, cutting him off. "Don't you dare try to justify this betrayal." Michael moved to stand beside me, his jaw set in a hard line. "This is low, even for you two," he spat, his gaze flickering between Richard and Evelyn. "Trying to cut Mom and Emily out like they're nothing to you." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a cruel smile. Well, look who's playing the hero," she sneered. "Tell me, Michael, how does it feel to be the bastard son, always on the outside looking in?" The words hung in the air like a physical blow, and I saw the pain flicker across Michael's face. But before I could respond, he straightened his shoulders, his expression one of steely resolve. "At least I'm not a manipulative old hag, clinging to the scraps of a family built on lies and deceit," he shot back, his voice dripping with venom. Evelyn recoiled as if she'd been slapped, her face contorting with rage. "How dare you speak to me like that, you insolent—" "Enough," I roared, my voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "I've had enough of your games, Evelyn, enough of your lies and your manipulation." I turned to Richard, my heart heavy with the weight of what I was about to say. "This family was a lie built on your secrets and lies, Richard, and I'm done pretending." His eyes widened, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved, the man who had promised to cherish and protect me, no matter what. But it was too little, too late. "I'm leaving you, Richard," I announced, my voice steady with newfound resolve. "And I'm taking Emily with me. We're done being pawns in your twisted game." Evelyn's face contorted with rage, her eyes blazing with fury. "You'll regret this, Maureen," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Mark my words." But I wasn't afraid of her threats anymore. Not with Michael and Emily by my side, united in our determination to break free from the toxic cycle of manipulation and betrayal. As I looked at my children, their faces etched with a mixture of pain and resolve, I knew that we would emerge from this stronger than ever before. United by the bonds of love and loyalty that Richard and Evelyn had tried so desperately to sever. This was the end of their reign of terror, and the beginning of a new chapter, one written on our own terms, free from the shackles of their lies and deceit. And as we turned our backs on the cabin, leaving Richard and Evelyn to stew in their own bitterness, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. We would face it together, as a family, stronger and more resilient than ever before. The weeks following my explosive confrontation with Richard and Evelyn were a whirlwind of activity. With Michael's unwavering support, Emily and I set about untangling ourselves from the toxic web they had woven, determined to start anew. The first order of business was finding a new home. A sanctuary where we could begin to heal and rebuild our lives, free from the constant specter of manipulation and betrayal. It wasn't an easy task, but with Susan's help, we eventually found a cozy little bungalow on the outskirts of town, far removed from the prying eyes of our former social circle. As we packed up our belongings, sifting through the remnants of a life that now felt like a distant memory, I couldn't help but feel a sense of liberation. With each box sealed and labeled, another weight lifted from my shoulders, another tie to the past severed. Of course, the whispers and rumors were inescapable. Our once revered family name had become a source of scandal and gossip, with Richard and Evelyn's manipulative schemes slowly unraveling in the harsh light of public scrutiny. "Did you hear about Maureen and Richard?" I'd overhear at the grocery store or the hair salon. Such a shame after all these years. But I didn't care about their judgments or their pity. All that mattered was the newfound sense of freedom that coursed through my veins, the knowledge that I had taken control of my own destiny. Emily and Michael, bless them, were my rocks through it all. We banded together, a united front against the storm of gossip and speculation, finding strength in our shared resilience. "We've got each other, and that's enough," I would reassure them, my voice steady with conviction. And it was true. With my children by my side, I felt invincible, capable of weathering any storm that life threw our way. As the weeks turned into months, our little bungalow transformed into a true home, filled with laughter and love. Emily blossomed, her confidence growing with each passing day, no longer weighed down by the constant specter of her grandmother's cruelty. Michael, ever the protective older brother, became our anchor, handling the practical matters with a level-headedness that belied his years. He was the one who helped me navigate the legal intricacies of the divorce, ensuring that Richard and Evelyn's manipulations didn't extend to our financial security. And through it all, I reconnected with the woman I had been before the toxicity of my marriage had taken root. Strong, resilient, and fiercely protective of those I loved. Old friendships were rekindled, and new bonds were forged, as I surrounded myself with a support system of women who had weathered their own storms and emerged stronger for it. It wasn't always easy, of course. There were moments when the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm me, when the memories of Richard and Evelyn's betrayal would come crashing down like a tidal wave. But in those moments, I would look at Emily and Michael, their faces alight with the promise of a future untainted by manipulation and lies, and I would find the strength to carry on. As for Richard and Evelyn, their lives unraveled in spectacular fashion. The once revered pillars of society found themselves ostracized, their carefully cultivated image crumbling under the weight of their own deceit. Rumors swirled of Richard's infidelities and Evelyn's long-standing manipulation, casting a harsh light on the facade they had so meticulously maintained. But I didn't revel in their downfall, nor did I seek revenge. Their isolation, their disgrace, was punishment enough, a fitting consequence for the years of emotional torment they had inflicted upon our family. No, my focus was on the future, on the life that Emily, Michael, and I were building together. A life built on authenticity, on the unbreakable bonds of love and loyalty that had seen us through our darkest hours. And as I looked around our cozy little home, filled with the laughter and warmth of my children, I knew that we had emerged from the ashes of our former lives stronger, more resilient, and more fiercely devoted to one another than ever before. This was our victory, our triumph over the forces that had sought to tear us apart. And as I embraced the promise of a future untainted by manipulation and lies, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, the knowledge that, at long last, we were truly free.